Welcome to the second session of the Virtual Summit on Just Transition, which is organized by Slyke and Trust in collaboration with other thematic leads and co-leads by sessions. Now we have a session which is a thematic one, which focuses on the energy sector with a great lineup of speakers. And just to recap a bit on what we discussed in our opening session, there were key issues that were highlighted about the mining sector, which relates to the energy sector as well, and then also how gender comes into play, as well as policies and national laws could facilitate just transition. So in the thematic discussions we are having today, we would be focusing first on expert presentations, and then we'll have a group discussion where you would be able to discuss what you would like to see in the discussion on just transition and specifically on the energy sector, the key outputs that we would like to have from this discussion, which we would carry forward into a knowledge product. So I'm Vastavi Janaka. I forgot to introduce myself. I work as the Executive Director of Slyke and Trust, and I will be coordinating or moderating this session. I would like to see all the speakers on the screen for this session. As you can see, we have 6 speakers. We are hoping that Happy would be able to join. He's having a bit of a technical difficulty. Sorry, that's a different, yes, thank you. He's having a bit of a technical difficulty due to a power cut in South Africa. We hope he'll be able to join. And hoping that, I think we'll move to the key speakers, and starting with Mr. Dicky Edwin Hidanto, who's the head of governing board at Mitra Hijau. I'll pass the mic to Dicky now. So over to you. Dicky, please unmute yourself. The mic is off. You're still muted.
Still muted?
Now can hear you. Thank you.
Okay, good. Yeah, always like this if you using technology. Yeah, I would like to present my presentation. It is kind of about 20 slide presentation, and this is I will talk about just transition on the country level, and the study is on my home country, Indonesia. So I came from Yayasan Mitra Hijau, or Green Water Foundation. It is an NGO, and we are working now with a lot of NGO to push the government to do the green transition. And currently, I work for the energy and environment issue for more than 27 years, and I also previously working with the Indonesia government for the UNFCCC negotiation as lead negotiator on carbon market. So if you see our Indonesia NDC, you will see that we have a very high target on the emission reduction. We have 39% by using our own budget, and then we also have more ambitious target, 41% with international support in the basis year of 2010. So you will see Indonesia is one of the most ambitious country in the world for the emission reduction target. So if you also see this same document, you will know that the energy will be more than triple. This on the base year 2010 to 2030, you will see that the emission of the energy more than triple, and then the forestry sector almost the same, and this will be significantly grow. But in here, you will know that if you concentrate in energy, so we will can complete more than half of the problems. So energy is very significant here to be reduced, the energy emission. I mean, and then of course the energy consumption and the fossil energy should be changed to the renewable energy. So here is the energy emission on our NDC, and we have set very complete energy policy from the targets, and then energy supply mix that currently we are still have coal. 30% of our energy supported by coal, and by 2020, 2050, coal will be still 25%. So coal is one of our base for the energy mix. And then the electricity generation, we have target for 23% new and renewable energy by 2025, based on our national policies. And then we also have another target for the energy intensity, energy elasticity, and everything. So we have almost every target that need to be reached for the greener economic. And in reality, our national energy consumption are still growing, and currently Indonesia intensity decreased by 21% and reached 0.084 ton oil equivalent per thousand based on 2017, and our total final energy consumption is increased by 31% from 105 million ton oil equivalent in 2008 to 137 million ton equivalent. So here it is the normal condition and the daily condition in Indonesia transportation. So, but this is before the COVID pandemic. We have master plan for energy conservation that we are trying to reach, and our energy consumption is not too good. So we have a target for total energy saving of 17% compared to the business as usual. So this is only to show you that we have a very detailed target on energy conservation, and our challenges about the energy consumption, energy efficiency, is the lack of regulation, low energy price that currently still happen, and immature ESCO market, and lack of financing mechanism. So this is our four challenges on the energy efficiency. And renewable energy, we have abundance of renewable energy resources. We have hydropower resources, 75 gigawatt. We have geothermal resources, up to 30 gigawatt for the geothermal. This is the second largest geothermal in the world after Iceland. And micro hydro, we have also a lot of micro hydro potencies. But at the end of 2019, so at the end of last year, we are still have very limited renewable energy compared to other energy in Indonesia. So we have only about 11% of the energy mix in the renewable energy. And remember, our target is 23% that must be reached 5 years ahead. And this is the renewable energy challenges. Pricing and investment is our big challenge, and data availability, that are now still a lot of lack of data, poor physical access for some geothermal resources, particularly the wind and geothermal, and land permits is always happen, and decentralized system, because in Indonesia we have a decentralized process, although the local government have authority, but the central government sometimes are not in line with the local government policies. And this is our renewable energy capacity development plan. Again, this is our plan before the pandemic happened. So you will see here, we have a target from 2020 to 2024 for the geothermal and hydropower, bioenergy, wind, and also solar. solar is the highest transform and the highest growth in Indonesia is solar PV, but still compared to other Asian country, Indonesia are not too high for the solar installation. And this is happened before the pandemic hit us. After the pandemic hit Indonesia, and like the other country, Indonesia are suffer with a lot of economic bad situation and health, and this is still happen until now. It is not over yet. So today I have heard that we have reached another record of the COVID-19 victims in Indonesia, both for the sick people and for the dead. And here you will see here we never have constant declining. This still happen, and Indonesia still suffering by the COVID-19 pandemic. And this is global carbon emission, and Indonesia is like in other country during the pandemic, our emission also reduced, so decrease in the energy consumption, make us make our emission also decrease. But is it the same compared with Indonesia? Here we'll see the global decrease very high here. The decreasing of the emission very big, but not in Indonesia. We only decrease here. This is our one of our latest data. This is Indonesia pandemic impact on electricity consumption. So you will see here the blue line here is the national. Here is the national, and the blue line under the national here is the household, and the gray here is industry, and the business is the orange here, and the yellow here is the government. So you will see here in February still normal condition. March on March the industries began to decrease, the industries energy consumption began to decrease, but in the other hand the household energy consumptions are increasing. So you will see here household increasing, and here on May is the biggest decrease on industry. But you also see here on May households have its peak here. The peak of the electricity consumption for the household is on May. So you will see in here that compared to the before the pandemic here, compared before the pandemic on February, currently in the electricity, for the electricity, our electricity consumption is higher before after the during this today, during this current months, compared before the COVID. Here it is very funny here that the industry is decreasing but household increasing. So this has happened, and it makes us very difficult to reduce the consumption of the energy, because it's only switch the consumer, and the energy only switch from the industry to households. And is it the green recovery will happen? So Indonesia, this is the Indonesia electricity planning here, and you will see here it is uh, not the Indonesia electricity planning, but this is the coal power generation. This is the coal power generation plan. This is not the electricity, but this is the coal power generation planning Indonesia. This is the realization is on the blue here, and currently we have more than around around 35,000 megawatt for the coal power generation. And Indonesia will still have a plan to increase uh, the coal power plant. It is because we still need the electricity to supply the all of sectors. But again, uh, compared to other type of energy, coal will still dominate Indonesia. And then the omnibus law was launched on October 6th. In this omnibus law of Indonesia, covering 79 law, contains 11 clusters, and the government hopes the measure will draw investment. Opponents say the move to slash regulation will harm workers and the environment. So this actually have a very good aims to speed up all permits and license during the pandemic and after the pandemic, and to attract investment to Indonesia. But also uh, in this law also the coal mining will be have uh, some what do you call improvement. I mean that in Indonesia, some negative impact such as coal mine increasing, nuclear power development, and uncontrolled environmental damage can be happen if the omnibus law implementation uh, are not as good as the law itself. So, in the other hand, the government wanted to increase the economic, but in the other hand, uh, we are worried that it also will damage the environment. And from my experiences, we believe that the just transition only can happen if we have clear target and program on national energy transition, and supporting policies and regulation for the implementation, enhance the involvement of all of the related stakeholders on the energy transition implementation, and international support for green energy investment campaign, capacity building, and technology transfer. So just transition in Indonesia only can happen if we do at least 4 of these items. Thank you very much, and Rosita, you have the floor now.
Thank you, Dicky. That was a very informative presentation on the context of Indonesia and the COVID impacts and how things are changing in terms of the energy use and also the law, because we were talking about this in the opening session as well, how laws
Yes.
could have an impact on just transition. So we can have more information on this during our discussion. Now I'll move to Claudia for her presentation. I think everyone has the detail about Claudia, but I'll just give you the titles of where she's linked to. She's a project director on climate and energy in Asia for Frederick Ebert Stiftung, and she's based in Vietnam at the moment. Over to you, Claudia.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll start by sharing my screen. So yeah, first of all, good evening or good afternoon also from my side. And I wanted to start by congratulating Rushita and her team for bringing this great panel together and for putting this event together. And of course, also thank you very much for giving FES the opportunity to contribute. So for those of you who might not know, FES, the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, is one of the political foundations. And the Climate and Energy Project is a regional project, but we are based here in Vietnam, working on the national level, but also coordinating and implementing activities on the regional level. So I first wanted to start talking a little bit more about our approach to the concept of a just transition, because as we have heard, if you were there in the first session, there is no universally accepted definition of a just transition. And FES has been working on just transition on the global level, the regional level, and also to some extent on the national level. And so we have sort of come up with our own approach, our own definition of a just transition, which I just wanted to share to start with. So as a values-based political foundation, which is committed to the ideals of social justice and solidarity, we consider the social impact of the energy transition as extremely important. And of course, this is not only true for the energy transition, but really for every structural transformation process. And for such a transformation process to be successful, we need to incorporate justice claims of all groups involved. So different stakeholders will have a different definition of justice. If you talk to young people, if you talk to indigenous people or workers and their communities, each and all of them will probably hold a different claim to justice. And so we believe that it's important to develop a common approach. So what FES does, we support trade union goals, and we advance ambitious, or we promote the ambitious climate protection and support strong and broad alliances by addressing all the relevant needs and bringing these different stakeholders together. And we came up with 3 key messages on a just transition. And the first one is that a just transition is a transition that limits global warming to 1.5 degrees, as it was affirmed by the world community and the Paris Agreement. And we know that the energy transition, or the decarbonization of the energy sector, is extremely important to reach that goal. So the energy transition needs to be ambitious and it needs to happen fast. The second message is that a just transition minimizes the risks of workers and their families, while at the same time maximizing climate protection and bringing all affected groups to the table. And last but not least, a just transition to a 1.5 degree world is not only good for the climate, but it's also good for sustainable development because it can yield a lot of co-benefits. And here I just listed some of these co-benefits, which most of you know. So it's not only about reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but transitioning to renewable energies will also create a lot of new jobs. It will increase or improve the access to electricity, and it will also have a positive impact on public health because of the reduction of air pollution. And now we come to the little bit more tricky question, which is how can we achieve a just transition? And FES, together with the German NGO Bread for the World, had a publication in 2017, a research project about guiding principles and lessons learned for a just energy transition in the global south. And 2 findings were that first, we need to build so-called transition coalitions, because ultimately the energy transition will manifest itself in the financial markets and in the real economy. So it's not only about talking to trade unions and social movements and NGOs who already convinced that we need a just transition, but it's really also bringing in actors from the private sector, from the city level or the regional level. And it's important that there are also stakeholders in this coalition who have an important say about how the NDCs will be implemented in the formulation of long-term strategies. And the second one, and it's also nothing really new, is that a one-size-fits-all just energy transition approach won't really work. But what can help is to have just transition principles that can provide guidance to prepare for, plan, and implement transition processes. And in this publication, if you're interested, you can find these just transition principles. I don't want to go too much into detail, but they're basically grouped on 3 dimensions. So the first dimension is the climate dimension, meaning we need to keep global warming well below 2 degrees. The second dimension would be the socio-economic dimension. So it is about social protection for workers in the fossil fuel industries, but it's also about creating decent jobs in the newly emerging renewable sector. And the last dimension would be the political dimension. So meaning we need to create mechanisms that allow for due participation and that guarantees everyone will have a seat at the table. And for us, all of these three dimensions are equally important. So one of the other questions was, what are the gaps and needs? And from our experience, when we started working on just transition back in 2017 and 2018, the concept of a just transition was actually still rather new in Southeast Asia. So what we did is we started to organize events about it. We held a regional conference in 2018, and we also held workshops on a national level in Vietnam to build up capacity of national researchers so they can think about and analyze how can this concept of a just transition be adapted to the national context, what can it offer to the national context of Vietnam. And the result was a study and also a short policy brief, which is called Just Energy Transition Opportunities and Challenges for Vietnam. And in the study, we tried to analyze the impacts of different power scenarios. So like looking at how high is the share of renewables and what would this mean in terms of employment. And our study, as well as other studies, actually found that there will be a very positive impact on employment. But we also looked at the challenges, and the challenges that we found and that we think need to be considered from the start to ensure social justice is address land conflicts, because we know that renewables can be quite land intensive, and the effects on local livelihoods by big power projects. And another challenge we found is inadequate vocational training. So still a lot of companies that come to Vietnam and want to invest in renewables, they either have to bring their own foreign experts, or if there are national experts, they still went for training abroad, for instance, to China. So it really needs a national strategy, as we have also heard before in the session with the colleague from ILO. It needs a national strategy for this skills training. And in Vietnam, we see that there are some things happening. So there are curriculums which are being developed and implemented at vocational training centers. And then coming back once again to this aspect that the new jobs created, and which we could also hear in the case of Poland, jobs in the fossil fuel industry, they are usually well-paid jobs, and they come with a lot of benefits. And we cannot simply take jobs away in one sector and then take them to another sector if the job quality isn't the same. And also coming back to what I said in the beginning, and which is sort of the red thread running through this presentation, is the need for multi-stakeholder coordination. So our suggestion or recommendation was, for instance, to create a national platform that could then develop a roadmap towards a just transition. And for that, we really need stakeholders from different societal sectors to participate. But there is a lack of best practice examples for just transition processes that could feed into political decision-making processes. Because yes, we have just transition policies in Europe. For instance, in Germany, it was just decided that coal would be phased out until 2038. But in a country like Vietnam, I mean, phasing out coal is not even yet on the horizon. It's not on a political agenda. What we need to fight for right now is that there will be no new coal added to the system, and then in the long term, of course, also phasing out fossil fuels. But I think for now, a just transition should really focus on how can the challenges and the opportunities and the benefits be, how can this burden share, how can this sharing burden happen in a socially equitable manner? And with this, I will finish. I would just want to share some lessons learned from our work at FES. So this year we conducted a webinar series on gender and energy, and I can just echo once again what our colleague from IDO has presented before, Kamal. He was saying that a lot of these jobs which are being created in the energy sector go to men and not to women. And yeah, I think gender justice needs to be an important principle of a just transition, but it's not going to happen on its own. So a just transition can provide women the opportunity to enhance their participation and their role in the energy sector, because as of now, the energy sector is still very male dominated. To give you a figure of Vietnam, in the state-owned power company EVN, only 20% of the workforce is female, and many of them are employed on the administration level, and they're not working as engineers. So there are significant entry barriers that need to be addressed, and they go back to a lot of social norms and conventions and prevalent gender stereotypes. Then we also think it's important to define green jobs in the context of just transition to ensure the welfare of workers in the renewable energy sector, and of course also social protection for workers in the fossil fuels industry. And I've said that before, vocational training is really essential to prepare the human resources which are necessary for the transition, because otherwise the local workforce is not going to benefit from a transition towards renewable energies, simply because they're not getting the training that they need. Yeah, and with this, I just wanted to give you an overview of what FES has been doing in the field of just transition. And once again, thank you very much for inviting us, and I look very much forward to the discussion and to hearing from the other speakers. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Claudia. That was very insightful. And for those who are not familiar with the references that Claudia made, we had a session about an hour ago, where we discussed these aspects on just transition and the workforce, where ILO was presenting. So she was referring to some of the discussions we had. So if you didn't join our session, there will be a recording which will be available over the week. You could always access it if you're interested. So moving to our next speaker, we have Mr. Patrick Rondo, who is the Council Advisor, Environment and Just Transition for the Federation of Workers of Quebec. So Patrick, over to you.
Thank you very much, Vashita. It's such a pleasure to be with you this morning. For me, it started pretty early. It's around 7 in the morning here. So thanks a lot. I will try through my presentation to show you the level of challenge that the trade union movement has to face regarding the energy transition. Through a tale of opportunities, failure, and sometimes insufficient ambition that can happen. Just transition is also a concept that we hear more and more about, especially as a response measure to the pandemic crisis that we are currently experiencing, but also as a response measure for the challenges that are in front of us. We also seeing more and more interest from different stakeholders, so it's not just trade union things now in this concept, and also more and more interesting cases that are on the way to becoming great success stories. Since I'm living in Canada, I'll support my presentation on examples from home, and I will try to demonstrate that work needs to also to be done on domestic level, as well as on international level, of course. When it comes to energy sector, we use a multitude of energy sources in Canada, including hydroelectricity, natural gas, fuel oil, coal, but wind and solar as well. There is no, a particular thing in Canada is that there is no homogeneity or a national energy policy. Each province, we have 10 of them in Canada, has its own provincial strategy, and this can differ greatly from province to province. In some places, you can find energy that is provided by the private sector, but also by the public sector. So we have both regimes in energy regimes in Canada. Of course, I will use my union experience to tell you about 3 examples of energy transition in Canada. In each of these cases, just transition played or could have played an important role as a success factor. My 3 examples reminds me when I was writing about them of the good, the bad, and the ugly. So let's start with the good, or how we can switch from fossil fuel to renewable energy without leaving anyone behind. Just earlier this year in Saskatchewan, oil and gas companies accidentally discover a groundwater table of brine. With brine, as you know, you can produce geothermal energy. So it is therefore by using the knowledge of workers in the fossil fuels sector that the company Deep Earth Energy Production began work for the establishment of the first major geothermal power plant in Canada. So that is quite an interesting example. This plant will allow Saskatchewan to reduce its GHGs by 40% by 2030. This is a magnificent example of the transition of jobs from so-called problematic sector, like fossil fuels, to jobs considered sustainable. It also tells us that we need to be careful about the value we place on jobs. Very often we demonize certain jobs, such as those in the fossil fuel sector, since we consider them problematic. Yet, by involving workers in solutions, we can achieve great results without them shying away from change. In this case, instead of targeting those workers, we use their expertise towards a better tomorrow. Too often, still today, we see an antagonism between jobs and the environment. In the absence of solution within their reach, you can be sure that workers fears and they will simply lose their jobs and will resist any attempts at transition. So it's really important to keep in mind that in face of fear, you resist. So in the good, the bad, and the ugly, on the bad side is the government of Canada hasty and unplanned decision to shut down the coal industry. Let's be clear here. The decision to phase out of coal is the right one, like all fossil fuels, but it cannot be done without planning and without the involvement of workers. In 2016, at the end of COP22, the then Minister of the Environment announced the closure of the coal industry by 2030. By relying solely on financial incentives, the government expected that the industry will plan a fade out of its activities in a just transition manner. You should also know that the place where this industry is most prolific is Alberta, where we also find the oil sand industry. The results were, just a few months after the announcement, thousands of workers were laid off without any support plan, as several sectors of this industry pocket the investments simply to cease operations. Despite the implementations of emergency measures by the Alberta government, we had to wait until 2018, so 2 years later, before the establishment of a just transition task force by the government to support workers in their communities. But the damage was done, I can tell you. Many communities were plunged into social and economic crisis, increasing the discontent of the local population. The labor movement has also had to fight throughout 2017, and I was part of that, to be included in this working group. This is one of the problems. Too often, we only find the business community around tables to plan transition aspects. The Just Transition Task Force finally did its work by making sure to visit each of the hard-hit communities and produce a very good report in 2019, subject to a series of support recommendations ranging from bridge to retirement, incentive to return to studies, improvement in insurance benefits. So we know the story. Now we can hope that these recommendations are going to make their way in the Just Transition Act, which the government has been promising for over a year now, since the measures put in place for co-workers are aimed only at them. However, other industries may find themselves in the same situation. There are therefore currently no accompanying measures for other sectors of activity that could be affected. This experience shows that without a just transition plan, we are endangering entire communities as well as social peace, especially workers when they lose everything. Finally, in the good, the bad, and the ugly, we'll go to the ugly. Barely a month ago, the Quebec government unveiled its plan for a green economy. For the Quebec government, this plan is a response for the pandemic recovery and economic recovery. So this plan should also allow the Quebec government to meet its GHG reduction targets, which are the same as those of the Paris Agreement. However, the Quebec plan offers a multitude of incentives, but without constraints, despite the fact that the previous energy transition programs were never fully used in Quebec. But this is exactly where all government fails. For fear of ending up with a social and economic crisis like that of the Yellow Vest in France, we avoid putting in place eco-tax, eco-conditionality measures for purely electoral reasons. In addition, it places the entire burden of the success of those plans on the habits of citizens and the activities of businesses. Yet, history shows us that this does not work. In fact, Quebec's plan also shows that simply betting on economic growth cannot work. For example, Quebec anticipates growth in energy demand and plans to use natural gas as complementary energy to compensate for peak periods to avoid the construction of new infrastructures, which is utter nonsense since over 90% of electricity comes from hydropower and production is nationalized. It is a crown corporation, unlike gas distribution companies. What also highlights the immense challenge that we all have to face in the coming years is that our consumption patterns are intimately linked to our production and use of energy, and that the growth in our consumption of goods and services will systematically put pressure on our increasing energy needs, constantly demanding more energy and new infrastructures. It is therefore imperative to address the issue of our economic models from the angle of resilience and not just growth. It will also require a major change for workplaces, particularly at the manufacturing and industrial level. The energy question cannot therefore be taken in isolation. If we are to move forward quickly, it is essential to include workers now in business decarbonization plans and in political discussions about our social choices. This is why the union movement is calling for the establishment of joint committees in workplaces to address the issues of decarbonization, the implementation of eco-conditionality measures in the granting of public subsidies to be included in subsidies, and to include mechanisms of just transition in the national determined contributions, so the NDCs of states. All in all, the important thing to remember is that the just transition in the energy sectors bring opportunities as long as workers are part of the stakeholders. The just transition must also be preventive. It must be work upstream. Ultimately, it is not just a trade union issue. I can assure you that, but a real social project, and everybody should be able to contribute. In conclusion, the time when the just transition was simply to support workers in their job losses is no longer enough. We must involve them and get them to be actors and not spectators. The energy transition is underway, and for it to be fair, it must be planned quickly and include those who will be affected by it. We must also absolutely take into account our common but differentiated responsibility and make sure that just transition mechanisms are included in indices. Overall, we want a just transition, not just a transition. I thank you very much, Foshita and everybody.
Thank you, Patrick. I just realized that you've been up since about 5 o'clock joining us because you were there in the session as well. So thank you very much. Now I would like to move on to our next speaker, who is Dr. Tusisa Sugatapala. He's a senior consultant with us at Slyken Trust. He used to be the head of the Sustainable Energy Authority a while back as well. So I request him to bring a bit of perspective from the Sri Lankan angle and the experiences we share. Thank you.
Thank you, Voshita. Right. So I will open my presentation. Hope you can see.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Yeah. Good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm talking about the same topic, but looking at Sri Lankan perspective. just to share some of the our own experience, and then looking at how to localize these global targets and challenges. So therefore my presentation will more concentrate on some of the experience we face. Just to put up the things on the table, like the need for energy. It's well established fact that energy is required for development. But this shows how our GDP growth is linked to electricity consumption, consumption per capita versus GDP per capita. We can see there's a strong linkage there. And even the annual growth rate of electricity and the GDP, again, very closely interlinked, mean that our development are strongly coupled with energy sector. That's the first message I want to just highlight. So when you look at Sri Lankan context, we have been using different type of energy sources. Conventional is renewables. For thermal energy application, we have biomass, and for electricity, mainly hydro. Then of course we had use oil for transport. But with the demand increase, we can see that the contribution for thermal energy is rising. Percent is around 50 to 55% from thermal energy. It's going in upward direction. When you look at electricity, it's more critical because large hydro, we have exploited the full resource now. The new hydro sources like solar, wind, and some of the small hydros are happening, but at a slower rate. So therefore, primarily the increase in demand for electricity is catered by increase in use of earlier oil, but now government has moved to coal. So for the coming years, the generation expansion plan considered on the coal. So the direction in our generation plan, especially electricity, is looking at the thermal energy, mainly coal. This is the generation expansion planned by the utility. It's a government-owned entity who owns the generation, transmission, and distribution, major part of our electricity sector. So according to this approved generation plan, we can see presently we have around less than 40% from renewables, but then with the years to come, that percentage will come down. So this is basically the action plan which is followed by the planners. But when you look at the other side, the political will and the policies, we have a different picture. For example, in the president, the newly appointed president, published his national policy framework in 2019, a year ago, which talk about enhancing the RE component to 80% by 2030. So percent is 50%, so less than 50 now. So it's a very challenging, of course, maybe optimistic task. But when you look at the earlier diagram, which indicate the planners or the some of the implementers who are following the different paths. So therefore, we see this issue, the policy and the implementation. There are gaps, more coordination. And more recently, like recent budget speech, the government again talk about these points, especially talking about now not 80% but 70% overall energy mix by 2030. Then talk about 1,000 megawatt of solar for the next 2-3 years. It's a massive increase because when you talk about Sri Lanka, we are a small country. Our peak demand, which happened during the evening hours, is around 2,500 megawatt. But of course, we have 4,000 plus megawatt installed capacity. So 1,000 megawatt of solar means is a huge amount. So that's the target. And also it talk about 500 megawatt for solar rooftop system targeting low-income families. So there'll be some fiscal interventions coming in that line. And it's also talk about increasing RE capacity in wind in the same level, like going for offshore and floating solar and so on, other forms of renewables. So that's also there. So this is again a kind of a government policy target. And also we have this NDCs, which is being updated now. In the previous one published in 2016, 15-16, the targets of 20% reduction, which talk about certain renewable energy projects especially, and also energy conservation. For example, we had a target of 150 megawatt of solar out of one of these NDCs. But in the recent development of solar, now we have seen within last 4 years, we have already installed around 250 megawatt, which is more than double the target we set in 2016 for solar 2030 target. So that means certain, it's basically through the political will and some regulatory interventions by the respective authorities has made that thing happen, the solar sector. So therefore, that's indicate that we can do it, like so. But then we need the political will. Now, these are, when you look at the those targets, the government is saying that 80% or 70% target. So one of the aspect basically is that we want to understand whether we have the resources. So in that context, as the leading agency in the renewable energy sector, Sri Lanka Sustainability Authority, they do this resource mapping. And presently it shows that when you look at the technical potential and also environmental concerns and so on, the total potential of solar wind especially is much more than what we usually require. So like solar 15,000 megawatt and wind 10,000 megawatts. But of course we have hydro and also biomass energy. So it's estimated that hydro we can reach around 800 megawatt, this small hydro. Presently we have around 300 megawatts, so 500 more megawatt can be exploited. And also the biomass also we have. In the case of biomass, we have to grow the biomass fuel like the residues and so on, like prelude and so on, and then we can go up to around 1,000 megawatt when you look at the potential land which can be used for plantation. So what we see there is basically we have the resource, but of course it will not come freely. Also the basic resource is free, but then the technology is not. So therefore there are tremendous challenges for making the policy target of 80% or 70% by 2030 a reality. Just to highlight the challenges we face, we can look at identify these challenges by looking at some of the global indicators. I'm just highlighting a few of those. The World Energy Trilemma Index published by World Energy Council, the recent one in 2019, it shows that Sri Lanka, the position. So we are not very good. Like we have, like there are 3 dimensions we are looking at: energy security, energy equity, and environmental sustainability. Since we have quite a good percentage of renewables in our energy sector, not only electricity but also thermal energy applications, we have biomass. So because of that, the environmental sustainability, we have some maybe satisfactory level of score, but energy security and energy equity both shows poor relative poor performances. That's indicate the imbalance of our development, because energy security become an issue because we don't have our own fossil fuel resources. It's basically imported, and so we have a huge issue in that direction because of importation of fossil fuels. Then energy equity also, the amount of like energy services provided varies considerably from the city to the villages. So energy equity also an issue. So meaning that just looking at renewable energy alone and try to develop this will not solve the problem, right? So we have to look at the renewable energy development in a broader context. I think that's where even the just transition aspect in energy become important area. Being a renewable energy, having even potential for much higher employment generation will not resolve these issues. This is another indicator. This is the important one when you talk about the transition. Is the transition readiness or transition energy transition index, again published by World Energy Forum, this 2021. So we can, I had just indicated the some of the countries. Number 1 rank is at Sweden. So they have system performances as well as the readiness for transition at a higher level. Then of course the other countries like China, India, including Sri Lanka, we are not very good position. So for example, the transit readiness is less than 50% mark, and system performance also not very at a higher level. Mean that although we talk about this transition, the going towards, although we have renewable sources, going towards that is very, very challenging. So we have to look at these areas when you are developing national action plans and implementing it. So basically, one of the initiatives taken by the SLSC is just to identify the resources and also technical potential and looking at these other challenges and thereby develop a roadmap. So these are kind of an indicative one I just highlighted here. So we map with the time to, let's say in this case, till 2050 and beyond, against the challenges of implementation of different renewable sources. In Sri Lanka, we have 4 main renewable sources: solar, wind, biomass, and hydro, which have been exploited, are being exploited. Other energy sources, renewable sources like geothermal, ocean thermal, OTEC. These we have preliminary studies done, but not very detailed. So therefore, we are not sure about the potentials. Even for the fossils, we have done some preliminary studies. So there are some information, but then it's not sufficient for us to plan in detail. We need more comprehensive resource assessments. So this type of approach are required for make the government's policy targets a reality. So as scientists or the persons working in the field, this aspect has to be looked into, and thereby give this information to the policymakers so that they can take the correct policies, the appropriate policies. Of course, this has been discussed that in the just transition aspect in energy sector, the renewable energy is considered as the winner because of its potential for employment generation on one side, not only the clean energy aspect, the carbon GHG mitigation potential. So, for example, when you compare with the investment compared with the fossil, it says that the renewable energy can generate 3 times more jobs than fossils for the same investment. So in that context, when we look at 2 degree or 1.5 degree targets, we can see a huge increase in employments. Again, as discussed also, some others pointed out, it's just not increase in the number. We have to look at how these jobs are, distributed, how the gender issues are being addressed, and then how these are distributed, of course, within the country and also, of course, the countries. So, for example, in Sri Lanka, for example, wind energy, we have some development, but then when we see the local contribution, we don't have local manufacture. Very rarely our experts are get involved. So therefore, the real benefit of using renewable energy for our development, even the wind is free, it's not there yet. So, so of course we are gaining through the maybe carbon reduction, maybe air quality improvements, but the full benefits are not exploited because our contribution, the capacity, the knowledge, the education is not there to absorb renewable energy. So therefore, to make this 80% or 70% target by the government, there are many areas where just to highlight some of the initiatives we have taken. So this with the initiative of what we call Battle for Solar Energy by the government in 2016-17, which basically promote. We had a regulatory intervention, some attractive tariff system for solar rooftop systems. There are 3 different schemes. And then with that, there are a lot of interest by the consumers as well as the suppliers. So there's a need for capacity building. So Sri Lanka's Sustainability Authority started this capacity building targeting mainly solar, because the local value addition is much more possible in solar than other sources, because the technology being so simple. So one of the programs is basically targeting the women sector. So this was the series of programs conducted, still is conducting like this type of programs, like comprehensive training programs targeting the technicians special programs are there for women. So that's one of the initiative. This is a more recent one. In fact, with this, what we call this battle for solar energy, I said that earlier, the NDC target we had in 2016 was 150 megawatt. But with this particular program, which was implemented through the political will and also intervention by the authorities, by today, but at the beginning of 2020, we reach around 250 megawatt. That's more than double the target we set to 2030. So meaning that when we combine like political will and also the expertise and also regulatory schemes together with addressing the capacity gaps, the challenges we have in this renewable sector or energy transition can be handled more effectively. So therefore, these are some of the experience we can see. Now, even prior to solar, this one, we had other developments, one in biomass, which was started with the sustainable fruit plantation. So it's where the farmers grow food as intercropping or undercropping, which indicate to the livelihood, and local people are involved in the processing, collection, transport, and so on. So that the value creation within locally in this type of plants is much more. So that's another success story. This is one of the area which is now being promoted by the government. Of course, we had a long history of development in small hydro, and most of our like development are locally designed and locally fabricated technologies. Of course, some of the some are imported, but majority of the work, especially civil and other, even the designs are local. And thereby we have several hydropower developers who are now operating not only in Sri Lanka, in other countries. So that's another area we can see how you could use renewable energy not only for clean energy but also addressing the more comprehensive challenges in the society. So so basically, for conclusion, I just want to highlight some key points. This may be also common for other countries, especially for Sri Lanka. We have very high potential. When you look at the total technical potential, it's much more than what we need. For example, if we use 1/3 of our roofs in Sri Lanka, we can generate the energy we require even in 2025. So we can see rooftop systems can be promoted in that context that's happening presently in Sri Lanka. So the potential is there, but harnessing these potentials for providing high quality energy at competitive price is a challenge in all the end use sectors. So therefore, that's something we have to address. Optimal utilization of renewable resources for socio-economic development is possible, but require methodical approach for formulation and implementation of RE development programs. When the policymakers declare a target, the scientists, the authorities, other experts should get together and develop a comprehensive and sound plan, or maybe RE development plan or any other energy sector development plan, so that the actions taken by the government to reach that target are more sustainable and provide more benefits. So that's a challenge for the educators or the experts. And for the RE sector to develop, it's essential that the most efficient environmentally and technically technology has to be used. Sometimes we think that renewable is free, and then the technology we use should not be. We don't have to worry much on that, but remember that the technology play a major role. So that if you're going for renewable technology development, you have to always go for modern and advanced technologies, which are matured, of course, so that we get the maximum benefits. Where we have to look at the local manufacture, value addition, and employment, where we can basically address the other aspects while providing the maximum benefit. And of course, research and development are also required. The innovations is a key to every phases of energy sector. It's not only the generation, but also transmission, distribution, especially looking at the options of central plants and the decentralized options, then smart grid options, and there are many, I think. ICT is coming up in a big way, big data. There are a lot of areas where we have to integrate to make renewable energy more sustainable. Being clean doesn't mean sustainable. So become sustainable energy, renewable energy has to be worked in a much more comprehensive way. So therefore, renewable is a clear winner when it comes to just transition in energy, but need to think holistically, where any sector is treated in an integrated system within the interconnected framework. Just being a clean energy will not make the energy sustainable. So with that, I will conclude just briefly to highlight the local context as well as some of the key learning points from our side. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sagadapala, for all the information provided. I think some of the things you highlighted will be taken up in detail in tomorrow's discussion about research and development, as well as cross-cutting aspects. So it's good to get some information today to start the discussion and move it tomorrow for a more detailed discussion. Now I would like to invite our next speaker, who is waiting from Cannes, Europe. 1 second. It's Elif Gunduzi-Yeli. I'm sorry if I got the pronunciation wrong. Without going into a lot of details, I'll pass the mic over to you. Elif, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Washita, for the introductions and for inviting me to take part also in this panel and for organizing the whole summit. I think it is really interesting to have this global overview, also for us who work in the European context now, because we are at a stage in the EU, which I'd like to share with you all now in my short intervention, that in the EU, things are a bit different because of the European Green Deal debate, and just transition has become more of a concept that is being used by so many different actors. So I would like to share some slides with you on the lessons that I learned from the EU, and of course, another part of the lessons learned is the coal phase out is actually happening in the EU now, and so the debate on just transition is very real. Some countries have already committed to coal phase out by 2030 or even earlier. As of next year, there will be countries who will be coal power free. So what is going to happen to people who have been working in these sectors and to the communities is a real question. So now I'll share my screen. Yes, here we go. Okay, I hope you can all see my screen. Okay, yes, okay, perfect. So just without going into the details, I would like to mention, it was really interesting to hear the other speakers and also in the morning session as well, that this global view is really interesting because in a way, energy policies and climate policies are made at national level, whereas we're looking at just transition at very local and regional levels. So obviously this is really complex. But what is happening in the EU is that there is actually money behind this. So the EU Just Transition Mechanism, just one slide to introduce what this is about for those who haven't been following the debate. So the European Green Deal provides a roadmap with actions to boost the efficient use of resources by moving to a clean circular economy and restore biodiversity and cut pollution. This is accompanied by a set of legislative processes, which is ongoing at this very moment. Negotiations are going on different files, and one of them is on increased climate ambition by 2030, which will be translated into NDCs hopefully in a couple of weeks by the member states. And the Sustainable European Investment Plan is the financial arm of the European Green Deal. This is created for financing European economy's transition to zero carbon emissions. Well, the SAPE, or the Sustainable European Investment Plan, was created before COVID and all the repercussions and COVID measures happened. So just to keep that in mind when looking at the numbers that I will mention now. This investment plan was plan to mobilize around 1 trillion euros over the next decade, so until 2030. And a key element of this plan is the just transition mechanism to support carbon-intensive regions to deal with the socioeconomic impacts of the transition and to catch up with the ambition. So the ambition is 2050 climate neutrality eventually, which will be supported by increased climate ambition for 2030. So that is supported with by a bunch of legislative processes, and a climate law is also in the making at this moment. So this is enhanced emissions reductions by 2030, as I said, which will be reflected on the NDCs. So I will not go into the just transition mechanism, but just to mention that this mechanism has three main pillars to mobilize money from the EU budget. So in the meantime, while the European Green Deal legislative processes are going on, at the same time, there is the whole making of the next EU long-term budget for between 2021 and 2027. So now, while we speak now, the negotiations are going on to put these two together, including the money that is allocated for COVID. So that is a separate budget item that is added to the EU long-term budget. Again, I will not bore you with all the details of this, but this transition mechanism, as I said, gives three main tools to mobilize money from the EU budget. The first one is Just Transition Fund, that is pure grants to support socioeconomic development at regional level, directed at the vulnerable sectors and vulnerable communities in this rapid transition to clean economy, meaning these sectors and communities in fossil fuel regions mostly, to survive the transition to increased climate ambition by 2030 and climate neutrality by 2050. So besides the grants in the Just Transition Fund, there are also two other tools. The second one is a public sector loan facility, which is supported by the European Investment Bank and an EU budget to mobilize public money and in loans and in grants. And then there's also a third pillar to support private investments, so to boost private investments. That is also another budgetary tool called InvestEU. But again, I will not go into this in this presentation, but I'd rather share some lessons learned from the processes that we are going through at this very moment, looking at the coal regions mostly in the EU. So how to build back better? What is being observed by especially NGOs, and just to mention that at EU level and at European level, so broader than EU, there are NGO coalitions who work together at local, regional, national and European levels to support each other's just transition work. And what we realize is that we had like building back better. What does that mean? Because we know that the fossil fuel investments come with injustice and social inequalities. So yes, getting wages from the fossil fuel sector is one part of the coin, the just transition coin, but the other side is about the existing injustices and social inequalities caused by the existing fossil fuel investments. And yes, also again, the inequalities and injustices caused by the impacts of fossil fuels. So that is climate impacts, which means the debate around climate justice, or air, water, soil pollution for the communities, or land expropriation. I mean, coal mines, they get bigger and bigger. So if a coal power plant keeps on working, then the mines will need to just expand, and that means land grabs and land expropriation from communities, which also means that former agricultures are now either dependent on the fossil fuel infrastructure or the mines that take their land away, or they will just need to move away to find some jobs in other sectors. So that's another part of the whole justice debate. Health, of course, due to the pollution, there's also the health aspect. Gender issues. So one major gender issue that we see in the field is about the jobs that is there provided by fossil fuel investments. This was also mentioned by one of the other speakers, if I remember well, that, for instance, coal jobs are jobs for men mostly. So that renders women stuck at home and mostly dependent on the wage of their husbands or brothers or fathers, and lacking economic independency. The third point is that there is a need for this rapid global energy transition to reach, to be able to limit the climate change to 1.5 degrees. But this has to be supported by local socio-economic transformation efforts. And this is a big gap. I mean, the global, if you look at the NDCs or the global climate debates, we know at the global level what are the carbon budgets, and that has to be translated into national transition, and that should be supported by local socio-economic transformation efforts. And that can only be done at local level, because the added value of different sectors to replace existing high carbon investments can only be known by the locals, as well as the definition of what is just for whom, which communities are more vulnerable, etc. All these decisions have to take place at local level. Yes, move to a society-driven approach. How do we do this? Because at the moment, and even more after the COVID crisis, or with the COVID crisis, the whole just transition debate in the energy sector is totally market-driven discussion and market-driven approach. And there is, I mean, that makes things a bit difficult for everyone, because there is less space in there for looking at local actors or involving local actors and local needs in that whole debate. So so yeah, how do we move the money? If we leave it to the market, some technologies will go away faster than anticipated. So that is the case in most countries in the EU, that coal power is fading away way faster than we have imagined in 2015 when the Paris Agreement came up. So finally, without ensuring equity, climate ambition rhetoric only belongs to the left or the green. So this was again raised by other speakers, but we can not only have dialogue with the people we agree with, and so without ensuring equity, not only in implementation, but also in the narrative that we're building, then the climate ambition rhetoric will only belong to the leftists or the green movement, and that will not help having constructive dialogues with all the stakeholders, including businesses and worker communities and others. Okay, main challenges. So the gaps between the local regional sectoral needs versus national policies in the course of clean transition. So as mentioned, and as I saw in the very interesting presentations of the other experts, that this is about clean transition, but how this is, I mean, the national policies drive the transition, and whether clean or not, it also depends on very centralized decision-making mechanisms, whereas local, regional, and sectoral needs are different in most of the case. So that is a big challenge, given the short time spent for the green transition to happen. Ensuring a bottom-up approach to just and fair transformation, while budgets and policies are managed by national authorities. So that is also, yeah, how do we involve local actors more in the whole debate around local and regional just and fair transformation? We need this transformative investments, because the energy transition, as I said, that happens at national level, and it doesn't have to mean that at local level one energy production facility is out to be replaced by another energy production facility to provide jobs. This can be planned in some other way if we're talking about economic transformation at local level. But ensuring that approach needs capacity as well, and also budget, because budgets are also managed by national authorities. Okay, need to reclaim just transition as those, so as the civil, I'm talking from the civil society organization and NGO perspective, of course, but this just transition notion and concept is used, as I said, in the EU by many stakeholders, which is good. That like as back like in 2015 or 16, it wasn't very well known. But now the problem is that it's used so much that now it is also being used by industrial lobbies for greenwashing. So, for instance, we are now fighting some legislative processes not to replace coal with gas, for instance, because gas lobby is pushing really hard to get the place of coal industry in the EU. Another challenge is lack of dialogue between certain stakeholders, but that is also normal given the other gaps in this whole complex discussion: climate policies, energy policies, needs, and capabilities, etc. So I would agree with the other speakers that there should be more systematic, constructive approach to have better dialogue between all stakeholders, and to ensure that certain stakeholders are also involved. And lack of capacity at local level to drive immediate clean energy solutions that leaves no one behind. This has been raised by different civil society organizations who work in different EU member states at local level. They say, for instance, that the Just Transition Fund that I mentioned will be given to regional authorities, whereas the regional authorities do not have experience in managing a huge amount of money in such a circumstance that the whole local economy would change and this money would be used for that. So then this leads to inviting third parties. These can be very experienced intermediaries or consultancies, big consultancies, and that of course changes the debate, because big consultancies, they don't have to go onto the field and do the surveys and look really what is needed on the ground, but they can just do what they know best, and that is business as usual, basically. So working with the very same actors at mainstream level, rather than going to the potentially impacted communities and workers. And finally, this broad concept of just transition, it does not define what is just and who would be benefiting from this justice, and transition to what. Again, so that is an issue that also leads to some greenwashing efforts. I mean, in the EU, if you follow the webinars or events that are organized by industries or for instance, coal loving or gas loving member states, you will see in the name of the event somewhere just transition, one way or another. So that is obviously an issue, because of course just transition is only a broad concept, and we would need to define it for different places and for different people. Okay, I would like to still share some good examples from Europe that, as I mentioned in this just transition mechanism, now currently the member states are developing their territorial just transition plans. So this is, as I said, the regional authorities together with other stakeholders. They're obliged to do it with other stakeholders, but it doesn't go in the right direction in all places. But we do have some good examples coming up. The first one is from the Upper Nitra region, Upper Nitra coal region in Slovakia. So in 2019, the Slovak government approved the plan for Upper Nitra's transition away from coal with inputs from the local community. I mean, this is a big win for the communities, because the communities had been opposing a new coal mine project organized in working groups to...
Excuse me, sorry, Elif.
Yeah.
Could you present in 2 minutes? Because
yes,
we
sure.
have the group podcast. So thank you. Sorry about that.
Yes, sure, no worries. Just 2 examples, that's it. So they have organized themselves in working groups to prepare scenarios for the transformation of the region to phase out coal. So yes, and this action plan on transformation of Upper Nitra region came out as a success of local communities to divert financial support of the European Commission's platform for coal regions in transition towards their interests instead of the interests of private companies. And yeah, the final example is from the Midlands Peach region from in the Northern Ireland. As part of its climate action plan, Ireland set up a Just Transition Commission, and in November 2019, they did something very clever, and they have appointed a former trade unionist, Kieran Mulvey, as the Just Transition Commissioner to work together with the National Economic and Social Council and to examine the transition to a low carbon future and to provide recommendations for Midlands. So really going to the field and sharing examples and getting different groups out to join into the research and to produce recommendations with them. So this quote is from the website of the Ministry of Environment, is that the wider Midlands is the first region in Ireland experienced a concentrated transition away from carbon intensive activities, and they are committed to exchange jobs in peat with jobs in renewable energy, bogs, so the peat bogs, rehabilitation and other new business opportunities. I will stop here. Thank you, and sorry for making this a little long. Thank you.
Thank you, Alif. And I'm sorry that I had to jump in because I was realizing in some countries it's a bit late, while in other countries it's a bit too early. So I wanted to have some time for interactions as well for the group work. So thank you very much. I think we can get more information from Alif on the case studies during the group discussions that's coming up. So you could explain some of the information in detail during the discussion. I would like to request Sinashia to explain how the things would work, and also how internally we would have this system of putting post-its and technology that I am not the best one to explain. So Seni, over to you.
Thanks, Osita, and thank you, speakers, for some really great presentations. So just very quickly, for those joining us on Facebook, thank you very much. We will stop the stream after I'm done speaking. Thank you very much for joining us. We hope you could join us for the sessions we have also planned tomorrow. Now, within the breakout groups, there will be 2 breakout groups, and we encourage everyone to first join the rooms and to also participate and contribute. Within the groups, please select a facilitator, a note taker, and if either of them do not want to present, please have someone, just select someone within the group who will present during the report back. We have a virtual whiteboard called Miro, and we have each of our team members in both of these groups, and they will explain this in detail. Basically, just think of it as a whiteboard where you could write your notes and put it up on a sticky note. And we will come back. So group work will go on for 20 minutes, and we will come back in 20 minutes. I will drop reminders closer to the 20 minutes, and when the 20 minutes is up, everyone will come back into the main plenary. We'll have a 5-minute report back for each group, and if we do have time, we will have closing remarks from each speaker. So thank you, everybody, and yeah, we'll put you into the rooms. Thank you.
Please go to www.menti.com and type the code that is in the chat box, which is 5680651. And then there'll be 2 questions which you can quickly respond to. And before we finish, Sinashia will be able to share this input on the screen. So I give it 30 seconds for those who are on the Mentimeter at the moment. And do we have the 2 presenters ready? Do we have who would be presenting from group 1? Group 1 report back. Oh, sorry, it's Patrick. I forgot. It's a
I didn't know which group I was.
Yes,
you want to report back? A quick report back?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
We were talking about that energy are very big players, that we have to challenge that. That's a big challenge. And maybe the need to democratize the energy production and distribution and take back literally the power in our hands. So that's the big challenge. That we have global level difficulties, gap in visions, which means that policies are often made on national level, but they have to be implemented on regional or even city level, which is quite a difficulty. And it's difficult to reflect that in the NDCs of the countries. And that regarding where you are living, either it's in the north or the south, that the debate around energy is quite different. So there's that also, and that we found those discussions in the UNFCCC inside the Forum on Response Measures, where we're talking about just transition and economic diversity, but that it's only principle at this moment, and we need concrete actions and mechanism around that. We also said that the price of energy is quite important, as long as fossil fuels are going to be more cost less than renewable energies. We're going to have a problem with the carbon pricing. And that there's a big difference where you live. There's no one-size-fits-all blueprint for just transition. So we have to adapt this the just transition regarding where we're living. That it's not just also a question of energy transition, but the transformation of our communities, that we have to develop a much more autonomy, resilience, local productions to address the question of consumption, and that it has to be done around a social dialogue with all the actors who are impacted by those changes, and that it's also a gender and indigenous issue. So basically, just transition is a human rights issue as much as economic or energy, and that there's a big difference between energy transition and just transition. If we only do energy transition, it's not just transition. So we have to think about just transitions as a way to transform our communities. So basically that's the and maybe just something on education, that people has to be ready for transition. So otherwise it's going to resist. They're not going to be on board of this. So we have to accelerate the capacity building of communities. So I think that round it up.
Okay, thank you very much, Patrick. So thank you everyone for answering the Mentimeter questions as well. Thank you, Patrick. Now I move to group 2. May I know who's the rapporteur or the speaker for group 2? Oh, Dennis, okay.
Yes, that would be me. I have been chosen to report back. I will just show my report. I hope you can all see it. I'll just very quickly go through the things we discussed. So we talked quite a bit about the gaps and challenges that are there, and like what's the important things that need to be there for just transition in the energy sector. So one thing would be data information. So decision making can be based on evidence. We need to make sure, of course, that people have the opportunity to do the skill retraining and be able to access other jobs. Then one thing was pointed out with the example of Afghanistan is there's a growing number of renewable energy suppliers, which creates new value chains and thereby creates also new opportunities and allows for a better transition. We need to ensure in total that the just transition is not only focused on the people working in the energy sector itself, but also on the whole supply chains that are connected to it, and also the whole community, which was pointed out in the opening session as well, with the example of the coal mining communities. So it's not just the workers, but also like the families, the whole community, and the supply chains that can be very far-reaching. Policy coherence is an important topic. The coherence between climate policies and development policies, that targets in one do not clash with targets or commitments in the other. Energy security can be a big challenge in the transition, especially in developing countries. Then we talked about institutional structures and the role of different actors. So coordination among stakeholders is very important. Fostering innovation in different aspects, like policy innovation, procedural innovation, technological innovation, that can be facilitated by the government, by the private sector, by communities, by research institutions, on different levels. Again, the role of research institutions. Energy efficiency is one of the pillars of the just transition or the energy transition. Yeah, roles of different actors. And then we talked about entry points. One would be, of course, sustainable development and the SDGs. Risk management components in climate policies or development plans can be an entry point for just transition. And then coming from government side, I'm not exactly sure what this note was referring to, but yeah, so these are some of the things we talked about. I would invite everybody from the group to add what they have in their notes, so we can also add it to the sticky notes here on the board. Yeah, and I think as a quick summary, I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone who worked hard to get all this information in. Now I would like to pass the mic for a few minutes, like 2-3 minutes, before we close, to Senasha to share what is on the Mentimeter as a result. Seni, over to you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for actively engaging with us through all of our various technology tools. Just give me 1 second. Just going to present this. I hope you could see my screen. So this was the first question, and these are some of the responses that we got. Thank you to everyone who contributed to this. This would also be input that we could use for our knowledge product. And maybe just give a 30 seconds so you all could go through this. And great. Just quickly. Great. Awesome. And this is the second one. I hope I showed both, and I didn't show the same slide over and over again. But yeah, so these were the two slides and the responses that we got. So thank you everybody for taking part and for submitting your responses.
Okay, thank you, Senasha. Just to inform everyone how this input would be provided or used going forward, we would have a knowledge product that comes out of this session, as in the summit altogether, where we would have thematic input that would be brought into the last session that's happening tomorrow. But we also have 2 more sessions tomorrow. Seni, if you could share with us, no, I think Senasha has gone off the grid. Okay, right. So tomorrow we have 2 sessions, one which is on food sector, which is happening at 9 a.m. Central European time. You're most welcome to join tomorrow. And then we have another session that is a thematic session, which is on gender, social inclusion, cross-cutting themes. Some of these have been already discussed in the discussions as well, like the gender aspects, having everyone, communities, vulnerable communities included, research and development needs being taken into account. So we'll be discussing in detail. And then we have the final session, which is the closing session, where we would be having report backs from some of the leads or the speakers who are available to report on what we discussed today and the other sessions. So do join us when you're free. We'll be very glad to have you. And we will try to improve on our technological aspects so we don't get confused or miss in between when we are trying to give input. So that's it from us today. Thank you very much for all who joined, who contributed actively to this discussion. I'm Vasavi Janayaka and signing off for today. Bye for now.
Thank you very much, Posita.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.